Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Place and Environment Scrutiny Committee of the 30th of April. I'll begin with apologies for absence. I understand Councillor Angelo is one. It's the only one we've received. And next we have the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of March. Does everybody, any errors or omissions people have noticed? No? Are we all happy to agree them as a true and correct record? Okay. Thank you very much. Next, declarations of interest. Councillor Wilkes.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any pecuniary interest or anything like that, but I do have to sit on the licensing committee, and I was also a member of the Development Contribution Scrutiny.
Thank you. Councillor Shacklock.
Yeah, I too, Chairman, sit on the licensing committee.
And I sit on the developer contributions.
Okay. And I'll add that I've sat on one of the developer contribution scrutiny meetings. Okay. Anybody else? No? All right. Thank you. Next item is consideration of removal of Hackney carriage zones in North Northamptonshire. And obviously, just to make the point that this is a scrutiny committee, so we're making recommendations to it's not the decision-making body, so it will go before executive at some stage in some form. Are you leading, Mrs. Wilcox? Oh, no, right, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Chair. This report brings to this committee a request for a recommendation in respect of the future of Hackney carriage zones in North Northamptonshire, following the recent decision of the Licensing Appeals Committee in March and prior to the Executive Committee in June. If I may, Chair, before discussing the contents of the report, I'd like to clarify the implications of the subject under consideration in relation to taxi licensing law, so that everyone is clear as to what we're actually talking about this evening, as it can get a little confusing. So there are two licensing regimes.
Can you move the mic a little nearer, because sometimes it's difficult to hear when we're being broadcast. So.
Sorry. There's two licensing regimes for licensed vehicles, Chair. There's private hire vehicles and there's Hackney carriages. For private hire, there needs to be three licenses: a driver, a vehicle and an operator. And this legislation was brought in 1976, and the matter that we're discussing this evening does not apply to those vehicles, drivers and operators in any way, shape or form. The other is the Hackney carriage, which is obviously what we are discussing this evening, for which there are two licenses, the driver and the vehicle. Legislation relating to Hackney carriages goes back to 1847, so unfortunately, whereas with private hire vehicles, when we became North Northamptonshire Council, private hire licensing immediately became a unitary matter rather than continuing as a sovereign authority matter. Unfortunately, because of the age of taxi licensing legislation, the legislation still applies to the four defined local authority areas from pre-unitary authority times. So for Hackney carriages, there are two defined areas of work. Hackney carriages can also apply for hire. They can also work as private hire vehicles. They can be booked. Someone can phone up a Hackney carriage proprietor and they can book that Hackney carriage to take them somewhere. Again, that is not something that is being discussed this evening. The only matter that is being discussed is the original practice of a Hackney carriage, which was to ply for hire. And that is to sit on a rank or be able to be flagged down while they're driving along the street. And that is the key aspect that is relevant to what we're talking about now when we're talking about removal of zones. So a Hackney carriage is permitted to ply for hire within what is legally described as the prescribed distance. As I said, this is the area of the local authority or the area of the zones where zones exist. In North Northamptonshire, following unitary authority, those zones do exist and replicate the areas of the old districts and boroughs. Therefore, a Hackney carriage in North Northamptonshire at the moment can only apply for hire in that zone in which it is licensed. To apply for hire across North Northamptonshire would currently require 4 driver and 4 vehicle licences. So hopefully that clarifies what we're talking about this evening, Chair. So following on from the Executive's decision last year, a 12-week consultation was undertaken through the Council's website and through meetings with the trade. This information was presented to the Licensing and Appeals Committee on the 21st of March 2024. The website feedback that we received is included in Appendix A to the report. The feedback that we received directly into the licensing team is included in Appendix B to the report. Feedback from the trade meetings is included within Section 5 of the report, and we've also included, in addition from the Licensing Committee meeting, some further information relating to other unitary authorities and their approach to dezoning, which is included in paragraph 5.10 of the report. There are a number of comments in the feedback which relate to what are, to all intents and purposes, policy matters. These are things like vehicle ages and the impact of the vehicle age policy on current matters, and the geographical tests that Hackney carriage drivers are required to pass in order to get their licences. The Hackney carriage and private hire policy was introduced in April 2023. We have already accepted that it needs to be reviewed this year, and that review process will be starting very shortly, where the matters that have been raised through this consultation process and some other matters that have come up during the period of the policy will be looked at. As far as the geographical test is concerned, we accept that the old knowledge test, which was basically a written test where drivers were asked to describe how to get from this place to that place, is not fit for purpose in the 21st century. So as part of the policy work that we're doing, we will be also looking to design a new fit for purpose geographical test that will come out with that policy. They're also suggesting that taxi ranks are going to be overwhelmed if we make this decision. There is no evidence to indicate that that is going to be the case. Certainly the unitary authorities that were spoken to, that you'll see the feedback of in the report, don't indicate that those that have already done this have that problem. And I think it's fair to say, Chair, from the feedback that we got, the existing Hackney carriage trade in the area, in the zones, don't appear to have any intention at this time to stray outside of their existing zones. We also need to introduce new bylaws. We need to do this anyway because the ones that we have are now quite old and outdated, and there are a new set that have been introduced, model bylaws that have been introduced by the Department for Transport. We can't move that particular part forward until we know whether it's one set of bylaws for North Northamptonshire or we still need to have 4 sets of bylaws for the 4 zones. Whichever way that work goes, there will need to be a period of time for us to arrange for new bylaws to come into place, because we have to put them to DFT and then they have to come back to us and approve them, and there's a process that we need to go through for the adoption of new bylaws. So there will be a period of time between any decision being made on this dezoning and when it can actually be implemented. So, Chair, the committee is asked, as you said in your introduction, to consider the report before it, make any recommendations that it may wish to make with regards to the Licensing and Appeals Committee's decision, and consider any further comments that it may wish to make to the Executive Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for the introduction. We actually do have 2 public speakers registered. I always think it's useful to have the introduction of officers first rather than... is Mr. Robb here?
Thanks for that. I've been there all day.
Mr. Robb, you have 3 minutes to speak, and councillors may ask for matters of clarification, but basically you have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Hopefully you can all hear me. Thanks for inviting us, or thanks for allowing us to come forward tonight. In essence, our discussion or our argument, Hackney's being allowed to work in other zones now. we just heard there that the test is not fit for purpose now. However, I would suggest to all of you, if you go into any other town, city or anywhere else in the country and you get into a black cab and you tell them where you want to go, you don't expect them to put it into a sat-nav and then be taken to where you go, and you would expect at any time of night, drunk and disorderly, whatever state you're in, you'd expect to arrive at your destination safely. But I'll make a few points anyway. At the last meeting, one of the councillors raised a point. There was a lack of detail in the report. He made it quite clear that he was a substitute for another councillor. However, he stated that he tried extremely hard to do some research on the dezoning and the proposal. The councillor is absolutely correct. The proposal to dezone states the following in answer to Appendix A, Item 4. Hackney carriage drivers will always pass an area test before being licensed. And Russell Howell said that the current test is not fit for purpose, but I would suggest to you it clearly is. It requires you to have a knowledge test of your local area, and we want to know as a trade exactly what the new test would entail. The knowledge test at the moment says the following. It talks about English language proficiency, general knowledge of local locations, driver and vehicle conditions, highway code, basic arithmetic, additional test, Hackney carriage and dual licensed drivers only. And this is fundamentally what you would expect from the black cab. A detailed knowledge of local areas by zone, route planning and bylaws. Yeah, we need to know where we're going. If I went into another zone in Wellingborough, I couldn't even take it to an estate, football ground, shopping precinct, anything like that, local McDonald's. I could only do it in this town. These guys from out of town and these guys here in exactly the same position. The geographical area, in order to know all of that, is impossible. Even in London, you only work at a specific area and you don't go outside of that. Now, it's been suggested that we go to those other areas and stay in those areas and work because the emissions and everything else, there's no point in coming back to this area empty. However, I'd say to you, we've got to come back at some point. Am I supposed to take my sleeping bag out of town and my sandwiches and everything else, know all the toilets where I've got to go, and then stay out there till all hours? We know this area and we work this area, and that's it as far as it goes. It is in the interest of all parties to do as I suggest, that we work in our own local areas and the zones be retained. I will finally add, councillors, that the policy is up for review next year. There has already been issues raised by the trade that the current policy is out of date regarding the government's best practice guide November 17, 2023. The best practice guide you referred to is 2010. That's out of date by some 13 years, and I'm talking specifically about vehicle age limits. The setting of an arbitrary age limit may be inappropriate, counterproductive, and result, this is what it says in the 2023 best practice guide, and may result in higher costs to the trade and ultimately passengers and also to local authorities. Bear in mind the amount of North Northampton County Council runs we do in various areas. The cost of that is going to go through the roof because of the shortfall in vehicles and the cost of vehicles as a consequence. The setting of arbitrary age limit may be inappropriate, counterproductive, and result in higher costs for the trade and ultimately passengers. For example, a maximum age for first licensing may have adverse unintended consequences. A 5-year-old used electric vehicle will produce less emissions than a brand new Euro 6 diesel or petrol car. Licensing authorities should not impose age limits, specifically with regards to the vehicles. They should consider more targeted areas.
Mr. Rob, it's nearly your time. Yes.
I'm finished anyway. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. And we have Mr. Riley as well. Same thing for yourself, 3 minutes.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I've spoken at many meetings about the issues that the Council have created with a blind ambition to harmonise all services at all costs. Myself and others have tried to explain the complex nature of our industry and how these changes will impact not only taxi operators, but could also impact others due to the lack of drivers available due to the new knowledge test, cost and time involved in getting a badge, and the lack of availability of wheelchair-accessible vehicles, forcing owners to go into debt to buy them. You probably look through the report in front of you and you think that you've got an understanding of the issue, but you don't. We explained to councillors during the fare increase that what they were suggesting would lead to confusion amongst members of the public due to hackneys on the same rank charging different rates, leading to conflict between driver and passenger. This has happened and continues to happen, with some owners still being abused by members of the public simply for doing their job. During the harmonisation of the policy, we stated that new measures would result in drivers handing back plates due to not being able to afford the new vehicles. This has happened. And those that have bought new plates have got into huge financial debt just to stay operational. And just so you understand what sort of money we're talking about, it's £100,000 to get one of these new electric vehicles. Now we're on the final stage, and it's all so simple for the councillors. We've got one fare, one policy. We may as well have one zone. The argument seems very straightforward. The reports state that other councils have done so with very little issues. But there's a point in the report that I'd like to highlight, and that's point 5.10b3. And it states, overall, councils have seen an increase in their private hire vehicle numbers. A proportion of this increase is because there has been a trend for proprietors to transition from operating hackney carriage vehicles to private hire. This is a point we've been trying to make for some time, and that is if you don't start listening to us, you're going to see the demise of the hackney trade across North Northamptonshire. You're discussing the merger of zones, but one of the key points in it is the new knowledge test that is to be created to include the whole of North Northamptonshire. That's 382 square miles. The knowledge of London's only 113 square miles, and it takes 4 years. We haven't seen it, and the excuse is that there's no point unless it's voted through. Effectively, you're voting on something that you haven't got the full details to at the moment. I ask that you send this back to the officers and ask them to sit down with the trade, and we can come together with a plan for how this is to work and secure the future of our trade. Thank you.
If I may, just a couple of things. Mr. Robb's comments about staying out of Corby, not going back to Corby. As I said in my presentation, clearly existing hackney carriage trade is entrenched in its current areas. This is as much about the future as it is about the past and now. This is to allow businesses that want to trade across North Northamptonshire to be able to trade across North Northamptonshire if they wish. Not everybody will want to do it, but if a business wants to set up a hackney carriage trade across North Northamptonshire, then this will allow them to do it and buy 4 licences for the drivers and 4 licences for the vehicles for every vehicle they want to put on the road. So I think it's a personal decision. If somebody doesn't want to trade across North Northamptonshire, then they don't have to. With regards to the vehicle ages, the new guidance from the Department for Transport is one of the reasons why we're reviewing the policy this year. And the comments that were referred to in that document will be taken account of in producing the new policy. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, any questions or matters you want to raise? Yes? Go on.
Thank you. Right, could I just clarify? This is not being imposed that they have to travel over all 4 zones. It is a case that one licence would cover all 4 zones. So if somebody from Corby wished to ply their trade in Corby, they could remain in Corby. And if somebody in Kettering wished to ply their trade in Kettering, they could remain there. So you're not actually requesting that they cover the whole of the area. Am I clear in that assumption? Thank you. I'll have a question later, but I'll open it to everyone else.
Okay. Councillor Zdorovic.
Thank you very much, Chair. I also want to thank the speakers very much for their comments. That was very, very helpful and really useful insight. I think some of the comments made about not necessarily feeling like we've got all the information was a little bit how I felt reading the report. There was obviously a lot of feedback from the people that completed the consultation, but I mean, the very clear thing that struck me was the amount of people who voted against this. The fact that the majority of people strongly disagree that this is the right way to go. I mean, there are obviously pros and cons both ways. There are people that want to cover a larger area. Understanding, for instance, things about the new test for the area. I think I would like to query that actually. So is that something that is correct, that they would need to know the entirety of North Northampton? Because if so, I do think that is quite a challenge and not very fair. So I'll let you come back to that in a moment. I mean, ultimately, what I got from the report was that a lot of councils have taken a mixed approach. It needs to be what the area needs, what they want. And obviously, it has worked very well in other areas, but I think we do need to listen to what people are saying here. So from the climate perspective, I did note about the fact that obviously people would then have the freedom to pick up fares on the way back, which would be potentially useful, but and obviously makes sense from a carbon perspective, because if you're already travelling there, then you can kind of get the fares coming back. But from everything that's sort of been saying, I do think that we need to be listening to the majority that are very concerned with this.
Thank you. Anyway, in that case, I've got a few things that I picked up from the that I think may be worth clarifying, that I picked up from the responses in the consultation, in no particular order. There was a comment about what happens if you fail the test, and I think it certainly says in there you can have a resit, but it would be, and obviously we don't know the style or the length of the test yet, but it would be helpful to committee to know what the procedure is. There's a comment from the officers. Obviously, if you're on a rank, you have to accept the fare, but there's a couple of things that if you're hailed at the roadside, do you have to still accept it? And if there's a lot of comments about wheelchair accessible vehicles, if you're not a wheelchair accessible vehicle and a wheelchair approaches you, and obviously that's presumably not the majority, is that a reason for declining the fare even if you're at a rank? We've got comments about the fares, but it's clear we've got the fares maximum level set for the whole authority, and if drivers wish to charge a lower fare by arrangement that they can. There's perhaps you could explain a bit. There's a lot of comment about the grandfather rights, and maybe not everybody understands exactly what they are. Perhaps it would be helpful to have a more explanation of what they are. The policy, I understand, means that you can, at first registration, the vehicle could not be more than 4 years old, but how long it doesn't say how long you can keep it, so obviously there is a time, but it's not in the report. There's a comment about people will go to places like Wolverhampton and others to get licences because it's cheaper. How would that affect their ability to trade, and is that realistic? There's also comments about safeguarding, and particularly, obviously, some of them will be doing school runs, so perhaps what that implications there. And there's also a lengthy piece, and I know Mrs. Wilcox will know about this, praising the Wellingborough standards as being very high, and I would assume that we're looking at all the standards of vehicle and so on being common across the whole authority, or is there something in that we're missing? So we'll start with those.
I think I missed one at the start.
About the test probably first. What will be the test, and what happens if the fare?
The knowledge test, as has been said, is something that we need to look at. And sorry, let me rephrase that. Not the knowledge test, the geographical test is the part that we need to look at. I can't imagine that there is a Hackney driver in North Northamptonshire at the moment that could take you to every road and street in their district. They're being built so quickly now that the chances of knowing every new estate in the district is virtually impossible, and we appreciate that. So we need to come up with a way that can address that. At the moment, and I'm not going to, this isn't set in stone, it's something that will be discussed throughout the consultation process, but at the moment, one of the things that we are thinking about is a mixed test between a knowledge of the key places, railway stations, hospitals, hotels, etc., from a rank, and being able to use a sat-nav. Now, I know there's a lot of Hackney carriages shouldn't use sat-navs, but they're part and parcel of everybody's life now, and it would seem reasonable to consider that technology as part of how a driver takes somebody from A to B. So it's something that we're considering. As I say, it's not set in stone. It's one of the things that we're thinking about doing to make it fair for everybody and to alleviate this concern that they don't need to know 300 and whatever it is square miles of North Northamptonshire, because that isn't what we expect. So test failures, there has always been a reset availability within the testing process, so that if somebody does fail the test in any of its parts, not just the geographical test, if somebody fails the test, then they have the option of a reset. Wheelchair accessible vehicles. It's a very grey area at the moment, and I've actually just had some email communications with the trade on wheelchair accessible vehicles, because I've been doing a little bit of research on it, and there isn't a requirement for a wheelchair accessible vehicle to pick up every person in a wheelchair, because not every wheelchair can be safe in a Hackney carriage. So there is some elements of what a wheelchair accessible vehicle can and cannot pick up. A saloon car that isn't a wheelchair accessible vehicle, if a person in a wheelchair is happy to get into that vehicle and sit in the back or the front with their wheelchair in the boot, then there is no reason why that shouldn't happen. That is the accepted practice. That's within the Equality Act and its guidance that can happen. So there are a lot of things around wheelchair vehicles that we need to consider in the new policy. Grandfather rights. When we brought the new policy in, we knew that there was going to be a significant shift in the types of vehicle that were going to be licensed as we went on in time. The theory behind grandfather rights at the time, which basically meant that any vehicles that were licensed at the time the policy came in would have an extra 5 years added to the life of their vehicle licence to allow the operator or proprietor of that vehicle to make preparations for moving on to something that met the new policy. And that's what grandfather rights was all about. It was adding the extra 5 years of life to vehicles, so that on the 1st of April 2023, somebody whose vehicle licence expired in May 2023 hadn't got to buy a new vehicle. It was to give everybody that 5-year window or more to sort themselves out. And that's what grandfather rights was. Wolverhampton. Wolverhampton is a swear word in taxi licensing circles. There are already Wolverhampton licensed vehicles operating in Kettering. They are private hire vehicles. It's private hire vehicles that Wolverhampton is licensing. They're cheap, their standards are low, and there's nothing that we can do about it. So there are already some Wolverhampton vehicles that you will see in Kettering. I don't know about other towns, but certainly in Kettering you will see Wolverhampton licensed vehicles. Safeguarding, obviously we do safeguarding driving training for the drivers. It is part of the knowledge test that they will have to have some safeguarding training. In terms of school transport, that isn't something we pick up on. That's picked up by the Highways Department School Transport team. And they require, to my knowledge, that all vehicles are through an operator in North Northamptonshire, so their drivers will have done our test. And I can't read my writing for the last one.
Maximum age of vehicles.
maximum age, yes, 4 years. At the moment, it is 4 years. We now have for first licence. Yes, from first registration, 4 years old for being licensed.
But presumably they can then use it for a period after
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Which
So
is...
if they're licensed after the policy came in, it's up to 10 years old.
Okay.
If they're before the policy came in, then it's that plus 5, unless they're London cabs, in which case it's 15. Because of the construction of a London cab, it's quite robust and will last a lot longer than a Skoda Octavia. Sorry, any Skoda Octavia owners out there.
So often it's a Prius.
Yeah. So, yeah. So. That was the other one. You can a Hackney will only respond to a flag if the light is on the roof. If the light isn't on the roof, they're not available for hire. So it's only if the light is on the roof that they can be flagged down.
But the point was, if their light is on and they're hailed at the roadside, not
Yes.
on a rank, then they have
Yes.
to accept it.
Yes.
Okay. I think that answers most of them. One other thing, one of the speakers talked about the paragraph where a number of authorities have found that people have switched from Hackney carriage to private hire. So perhaps you could detail what the effects of that would be for the customers primarily.
It's difficult to tell from my personal knowledge of how much use Hackney carriages actually get at ranks. If I look at Kettering, apart from a Friday and Saturday night, I think probably most Kettering Hackneys are doing private hire work. I don't know about Corby. The two gentlemen that spoke probably be able to give you some information about how much of Corby taxis work is private hire work. There's 114 Hackney plates in Corby. It's the most of any area in North Northamptonshire. So, but there's not that many rank spaces. So I assume there is some private hire work being done by Hackney carriages. So there is a private hire market out there that could be picked up by moving from a Hackney, but it would mean a decrease in the number of Hackneys on ranks. But as I say, I don't know how much business they get. I see this rank down here in Corby is very busy in the daytime. I'm not sure about anywhere else.
Okay. Certainly the rank in Wellingborough is empty, particularly at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when they're all doing school runs. Councillor Irvine, do you want to come in?
Thank you. I'd like to come in again on this, the private hire trend that's referred to and that one of the speakers referred to. I don't understand from the point 5.10B3 whether this increase is because of the move towards dezoning or it's just a general increase that is happening anyway. Can you clarify about that?
Sorry, I can't. It's not information that I have access to. I do know that KLM Taxis in Kettering is reducing his Hackney carriage fleet and moving to private hire vehicles, and he is one of those that's going to Wolverhampton for some of that. So there does seem to be a move generally from Hackneys to, because I would assume it may be because the vehicles are cheaper. There is a lot of difference in price between your normal saloon vehicle and a wheelchair accessible vehicle. I know the gentleman said that an electric wheelchair accessible vehicle is £100,000. I have seen Ford conversions that are going to be £60,000 to £70,000, but in anybody's, that's still a lot of money. So it may be that is driving some of the shift.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry, I'm I'm probably being dim here. I'm still a bit unclear. You see, this section B, 5.10, is all about what other councils have experienced. And so by putting in this paragraph, overall councils have seen an increase in their private hire vehicle numbers, that implies that it is related to the matter of dezoning. But you're saying that you cannot say whether or not it's related to dezoning. I was just wondering why it's in this report then. Why is it even mentioned?
So a colleague of ours rang around those local authorities that had dezoned and those that hadn't to try and get some information from them. Unfortunately, not able to speak to all, but she certainly did get from some an indication that there was a change in the number of private hire vehicles. As Russ has mentioned, partly that seemed to be due to the cost of a wheelchair accessible vehicle. So what they couldn't say is whether that would have perhaps happened anyway or whether it was part of this. But some did say that they did see as a consequence an increase movement from the Hackney trade into the private hire trade. I didn't get the impression we were talking significant numbers, because it's all very anecdotal, the information that we're able to get from officers. But anecdotally, they did see a change. Overall, the message seemed to come back that that wasn't causing any particular issues, that the trade that had traded in a certain area continued to trade in a certain area, and it didn't hugely change matters, but there was a slight movement towards the private hire trade. They weren't able to give numbers, but they did indicate that there was this movement that was indicated in the report.
Councillor Cole, did you want to come back now? Or?
Thank you. It was picked up earlier that obviously there's a huge difference between where the Hackney cabs are located and where private cabs are located. Obviously, this is people's livelihoods here, so we've got to take every single point into consideration. And I just want to clarify something in my mind, that we've talked about the test procedure and we've talked about the fact that it still hasn't been clarified. But if, and I brought it up earlier, but I want to make this perfectly clear, if a Hackney cab driver from Corby decided he'd got a fare to take him to Kettering, and then he decided that he would come straight back to the area that he wanted to trade in as Corby, A, would he be allowed to do that? B, if somebody from Kettering decided that they wanted to bring a hire to Corby and they wanted to hang about until they got hailed, but they didn't have the knowledge, I think this is what the taxi drivers are referring to, the fact that it's an overall knowledge of the area. Would the people locally be able to flag down that lift as well? I hope I've made myself clear.
You have. So, your first example of the Corby driver driving to Kettering, dropping off and coming back to Corby, yes, they can do that.
Okay.
If the zones are removed and a Kettering driver wished to drive over to Corby and drop somebody off and then stay around and see if they get flagged down or go on the rank and pick somebody up, then they would be within their legal rights to do so.
Right.
But we would be looking at the knowledge test to make sure that they're not blindly driving around Corby, taking somebody to an address that they have no idea where it is. So, the geographical test.
I think the point made earlier is that it depends whether they had their light on or not. If they're not wishing to take a fare, they would leave the light off.
Yes.
Yes. That's what I was trying to infer. Yeah. Yes, sorry. I didn't make it very clear. Yes. Thank you.
Councillor Wilkes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Two initial areas I just want clarification on. So when we're talking about the age of vehicles, and I appreciate it isn't the predominant point of the report, but it is. It has been referenced multiple times. So at the point of registration, if we go with new, the comments that have been made in here, at the point of registration, it has to be less than 4 years old. Once registered, it can be up to 10 years old.
Yes, licensed rather than registered.
Okay.
The licensed is first registration date to 4 years old, 4 years from that date. And then once it's been licensed, it can carry on for 10 years.
Okay, so for a further 10 years or until the vehicle is 10 years old?
Until the vehicle is 10 years old. Okay,
thank you. Second area of clarification, and my colleague asked the question, but I'm not too sure if it was answered quite fully. So if we look at other councils that have done this, and clearly lots of councils have, and I can understand the reasons for doing it, I can understand the reasons why some might not want it. The other councils are saying that typically that the Hackney drivers are sticking with the area that they know, and that makes perfect sense, of course. They might be allowed to ply across the whole of North Northants, but they're sticking to the area that they know. But even if they decided to stick with the area they know, they would have to do the you called it the geographical test for the entire North Northants as it stands at the moment. So even if they wanted to just stay in the region that they knew, they would still be tested on the entire area.
Yes, because we'd be licensing them for the whole area. If they chose to stay in Corby, Kettering, Wellingborough, or Rusden, Iron Ferret, they're quite at liberty to do so, but their licence would allow them to apply for hire across the whole of North Northamptonshire.
Okay, thank you. And again, actually, that I understand why that's the answer, because that does make sense, albeit it makes it more difficult. So then, just Chair, just for some clarification, if we were to, it's an odd order in my head. It's an odd order that we're doing this because I agree with harmonising the zones. I think from everything that I've heard, it makes sense. It certainly makes sense for the council to only have to have one set of policies, one set of, I can't remember what the terms were, the new bylaws that we have to create. So I understand the reason for doing that. But it is vitally important that supporting that merging of the zones are all the correct policies and the correct testing and the correct geographical testing. But we don't have that. We don't really seem to even have an understanding of what it's going to look like. You know, you talk about we might be relaxing it. It isn't fit for purpose. We haven't really heard why it isn't fit for purpose, but I take your point that it isn't. So if we were to introduce the single zone, when would that happen? And would all of the policies and the tests be prepared in advance, well in advance of that?
I think the answer is that they couldn't write the new policies, the new tests, till they knew whether it was 4 zones or 1. And I suspect that the executive report would say it would be introduced as and when the other elements were least available.
Chair, actually, yes, I take your point on that, and I did consider that. But then I thought, well, if the test isn't fit for purpose, it isn't fit for purpose whether we're 1 zone or we're 4. If it's not fit for purpose, it's not fit for purpose. It needs rewriting. And if we were thinking of rewriting it, then we would have a grip as to how we're going to rewrite it, how it's going to look, and are we going to include sat-nav usage. So I just wonder how, what are the timescales? What are we looking at from a phase of this?
Mr. Smith wants to go in.
Chair, if I may, Mr. Howell obviously set out some principles in terms of how we're likely to approach the test in terms of the new geographical test element of it, because the other elements that obviously Mr. Robb identified as being valued and necessary as, you know, being ongoing, they will remain in terms of the other elements of the test. So it obviously clearly needs to be a proportionate test given the nature of the size of the new geographical area of North Northants compared to the legacy areas. I think given the amount of concern that we're aware that there is around this subject that's come out through all the consultation that we've had directly with the trade and through the consultation that took place via the website, then I think it would be remiss of us to effectively seek to introduce a test without, you know, proper consultation in terms of what that test might look like with the trade. So obviously, if the decision was made to go ahead with dezoning by the executive, then obviously one of the things we would then need to progress is the geographical element of the knowledge test. So as part of that, you know, we would undertake to consult with the trade around what that looked like and how that was implemented to try and ensure that we do arrive at a test that's fit for purpose, and effectively it's not a test that people feel that's then is imposed upon them, but one that they've helped hopefully sort of shape in terms of what the finished product looks like. And I know that's not what they would rather. I know they would rather we can produce an example of that now and say what that looks and feels like. But obviously as officers, you know, it wouldn't make sense for us to do that work now, because that might be work that's never required if we choose not to dezone. So there will be a time period that has to elapse before we can implement any decision to dezone, if that ultimately is the decision of the council, in order that we can do that work and make the other changes that need to be made as well to the likes of the bylaws and to the policy to reflect us being dezoned if we do go to one singular zone.
Okay, go on.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That answers most of those questions. So, one of the points that was considered, or one of the points that was made in here and asked for consideration, was that we delayed the decision. But actually, it sounds to me, even if we recommend to the exec now, clearly there is going to be a delay, a lengthy delay, I'm guessing, in implementing this, because there's lots of things that need to be done before, and a lot of those things need consultation, which takes time. So, what are we looking at? What's the estimated time? If the exec agree on this, what is the estimated time to roll out?
Need an officer to answer that one.
It's been suggested that we look at April next year, April 2025. Certainly devising a geographical test that we can put out to consultation with the policy, that will be doable. For want of a better expression, the piece of string problem is the DFT and the bylaws. If we're going to the DFT for a new set of bylaws, we don't know how long they're going to take anyway. So we've got to allow ourselves a significant window to allow for them to go through the giving us permission to adopt a new set of bylaws, and we can't get a timescale out of them. So we need to allow ourselves a decent window for that. So April 2025 would appear to be a reasonable period of time to allow us to get everything sorted out.
But did I understand from the paper that if you use the sort of template one that they issue, that short circuits, or at least shortens the time?
Yes, Chair. They produce a set of model bylaws, and if you go with their model bylaws, then it gets signed off a little bit quicker than if you try to write your own. They don't like you trying to write their bylaws for them. So it will, in theory, speed up the process, but what that looks like on the ground, I have no idea. And I've asked the DFT for some idea, and they won't give me one.
Okay. Councillor Fedorovich wants you to come in.
Councillor Collins first.
Well, go on then.
You definitely had a hand up.
Thank you. Right, just changing it into a sort of different point of view. If Corby were all geography teachers and Kettering were all history teachers, and East Northants were English teachers, you're actually asking them all to become supply teachers of every subject. 1 year isn't a great deal of time to do that. Would they still have the choice to remain their independent specialists within the one zoning?
They could choose to only operate, but they would be covered by the whole thing.
Yes, no, what I'm worried about, you're saying the test has to be done to cover the whole area. Now, they might not want to study history, English. They might just want to study geography. Do you see what I mean? You're actually saying to them, you've got to study all these subjects. And I just want to get it into my head that they would have the choice in their livelihood to be able to still do what they want to do well for the area they want to maintain. Does that make a point clearer than I tried to make earlier?
It's perfectly clear, Chair. Yeah, to an extent. But I suppose what we're basically saying is you can be a supply teacher with an iPad in your hand so that you can so you can refer to things rather than have to know it all. So we can't have, if there is a decision to remove the zones of North Northamptonshire, then we can't continue with zoned testing. because the licences that we will be issuing will be for North Northamptonshire. So a driver may wish to go elsewhere and change their job and do something else, and it will give them that opportunity. There will be no zoned tests if the decision is taken to remove the zones.
Better analogy might be if you're a centre half playing for the team, you can play up front if the team needs you because you're all wearing the same shirt. Mr. Smith. Sorry,
I think just another point to emphasise is I think one of the things that is coming through in terms of the comments through the consultation is that people are seeing that this knowledge test has been a massive barrier and for people being able to enter the trade potentially and the loss of drivers as a consequence. Well, I guess from a licensing officer's point of view, it's not in anyone's interest for us to set the bar in relation to this geographical knowledge test so high that people can't meet that test, because that's not in anybody's interest to effectively have, you know, a dearth of, licensed drivers, such that there's not enough licensed drivers to actually provide the public service that Hackney carriages provide. So that's another reason for wanting to consult on this test, because we do need to make sure that we actually set the test at the right level and set the bar at an appropriate level, which effectively reflects what's required in terms of a modern test and the increased size of Northampton as an area and the key locations that people would need to know, but not make it so difficult that no one can pass it, because that's just not in anybody's interest, as I've said. So, you know, we don't want the test to be ultimately a significant barrier to people being able to enter the trade, because that's just not in the interests of both the local trade or our interests as a licensing authority to have no licensed drivers.
Councillor Fedorovic.
Thank you. I think a lot of the conversation has kind of felt like we're already pushing for this to happen. And I think I'm a little bit sat here thinking, well, the majority of people said that they didn't want this. We've asked people their opinions. We've had people come in today to talk to us about the problems, the fact that we don't necessarily have all the answers for this or all of the information. I appreciate that there's more consultation likely to be done if this were to go ahead, but quite frankly, I wouldn't be happy putting that forward, saying we need to, on the conditions of we consult and do all of that. It feels for me that we need to go back to actually talking to people. If this is generally what people, I'll just say the busiest meeting that we had, one of the busiest regarding the taxi licensing and harmonising of that, I don't want to see us rush into harmonising again when it's just convenient for some. We're ultimately, I was going to ask about the cost of the test, because there was talking about the costs as well as just the challenge of that. But ultimately, if there is a barrier around the test, I was going to query potentially, is there a way that we could have people that are tested on the area where they are based, and then have that sort of wider sat-nav test for other areas outside the main district. But again, I think conversations about that test needs to be done before we sort of go ahead and push this through to be sort of approved. We need to have that conversation and make sure that this is actually going to work, or that there could be some sort of compromise found before we push that forward. Otherwise, this is completely a moot point. I really appreciate some of the things that people have brought forward here, and I think the costs and the challenge, the time that this will take and put on people who are already struggling. Everyone's struggling at the moment, but I think we just need to make sure that it's the right thing, and ultimately that's why we do consultations, to make sure that we've listened to what people want. And every area is different, and in our North Northampton in particular, we've come from borough councils, we've got very particular areas and people that feel very close to those. So I think we do need to make sure that in terms of the knowledge that test, I think we should, as suggested, go back to the drawing board, come together with officers and actually have those conversations before we push this forward.
According to the report, the senior officers have met trade representatives in paragraph 5, and of course there's been an online and a paper consultation already, which is why you've got pages and pages of responses. For me, there's a couple of things. One of the things I hear regularly is from East Northampton that there are very few taxis operating there, certainly in one or two of the towns, but the outlying districts are really struggling for taxis, and this seems an opportunity where people could use. I mean, if you've only got to go a couple of hundred yards from Rockingham Speedway, and you're in the old East Northants because of where the border is. So there's an opportunity there. But the other thing that struck me, I don't use taxis very often, but what I have done a lot of is medical driving, and particularly to Kettering Hospital. And the number of, you take people there, and medical drivers tend to wait and take the people back. And the number of people who get in the car and say, I don't use taxi anymore because I can't get back. They'll sit and try and ring it. They have to ring a taxi, and the taxi doesn't want to go. With this, if somebody brought them, and a taxi brought somebody, it could then take another passenger, provided it wanted to go to the similar place, so the residents would actually be advantaged, because they wouldn't. People who are patients at the hospital would not have to wait around for a taxi, and a lot of them, and I've had a lot of that complaint, and it's one of the reasons people come to the medical car service, because they get a better service in that respect, and it's cheaper. So that was one of the first things I thought of when I saw this proposal. Any more comments from Councillor Shacklock?
Yeah, Chair, if I can just come back over East Northants. Obviously, and I've mentioned this before at the Licence and Appeal Committee meeting, we don't actually have taxis in our area. We're totally reliant on private hire, and it predominantly comes from Peterborough. It doesn't come from Northants.
Yeah, Councillor Wilkes.
Thank you, Chair. So I've asked a lot of questions. We've all had an awful lot of information. Crikey, we had a lot of information in here, but we've gathered a lot since. To sum up really where I sit now, Chair, so I'm happy that tests are going to be reviewed. Clearly they need to be. We need to, I think, I can understand the reason for wanting to merge into a single zone, and I can understand why the councils have done it, typically with fairly positive feedback. But I think bringing everything together and enabling us to have a single set of policies and a single set of bylaws, and importantly, a single set of rules and fares for the public. I mean, we are also considering what the public think, of course. That makes sense for any large organisation. It makes sense to have single sets of policies. I'm happy, really very happy, to understand that there's going to be a lengthy introduction period for this, because there needs to be. There's an awful lot, as has been said, there's an awful lot of work to do between now and any potential go-live date. I like the idea that it's going to allow operators, should they wish, new operators or existing operators, to come in and work across the entire area. I mean, we do all, being a councillor that sits in East Northants, we get constant complaints from the public about the problems with taxis and moving across. So I understand the reason for that. There is going to be, gladly, a time in the future for us to sit around and debate and argue about the new policies that come in and the age of vehicles. The age of vehicles is something that I have a specific issue with. But of course there is a time to do that outside of what we're being asked to do now. And at the moment all we're being asked to do here is to recommend what has been put forward so far outside of those new policies, outside of the opportunity to argue for vehicle ages, to put this policy forward to the exec. So if you're looking for a proposal, Chair, I'm happy to propose that actually this report goes through to the exec, because I think the time is right. There's a lot more work to do, but the time is right for this.
We may need some wording. Anybody else? I was going to go to recommendations anyway. So in 3.1, we've got a recommendation. A is a fact anyway, because the Licensing and Appeals Committee have already recommended that, so there's no need to change or do anything. And then B, it asks us to make any recommendations, and I think the recommendation we want to make is for officers to conduct consultation on the relevant tests and ensure that they are ready simultaneous with the introduction of any single zone scheme that comes in, so that it all comes in together and we don't have that problem of things coming separately.
Yes, I'd definitely like to make sure that that test is sorted out, because it's not fair to throw something on somebody that they don't want to do. And to say they could go and get another job is quite harsh, I felt.
I don't think anybody's saying that. I mean, it should be an opportunity for additional income and additional thing for them.
Yeah.
I don't know how many are private, owned by members, how many are part of a company like the private hire are. But, yeah. Okay, sorry.
Chair, if I may, I'd like to propose that the consultation goes back out to the relevant parties, and that the test and various other elements of this are reviewed, and that another view is taken to sort of say for or against. If there's a majority, then I think that should go forward to exec. If not, I don't think it should. We're here to serve the people and what they want, and if we can't reach a good conclusion, then I think it may not be suitable for this area, and I think that would be a fair way forward.
I think we've had 3 lots of, well, it may have been combined run together simultaneously, but 3 lots of consultation. I think that we're talking about consultation on the tests and any other elements that need to be introduced, and presumably we'll get correspondence on the other bits as well.
Yes, I think it'd be the elements that are...
Oh, right. Okay, so Councillor Wilkes.
Sorry, Chair, if I can just clarify, I'm including that. So that wasn't separate. So what I'm saying is that I'm happy to propose that this report goes through to the exec. But of course on the understanding that there is a whole load more work that has got to be done between now and any go live date. And that work has got to include that, which has got to go back out to consultation and come back to be voted on, all the new rules and the policies. So that would have to be done.
So my recommendation was that we say that consultation on the test and any other new procedures that are introduced has to be carried out, and any the single zone is not introduced until those are ready, and it's all done simultaneously. There'll be other better wording than that to be done, but
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Chair, if I may, I would very much specifically like to include, if you'd be happy to include that, Councillor Wilkes, that there's a majority agreement from Hackney drivers, because I think that is the key thing here. Is
it's a consultation. You can't fetter the executive with the decision. We can only recommend. We can't fetter the executive with saying what the result will be.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Mr. Candler's indicating.
You nearly introduced me as Councillor Candler then, didn't you? I think it's been a really informative and helpful session, and is definitely going to enable us to further enhance the report based on the comments that members have made. So I don't disagree. I think they've all been well made by both the speakers and by members. I think we also probably need to include in there, the only thing that I would suggest goes in is a timeline as well, because I think the points have been made, and I think we can probably just tighten that out between now and when we take it to June as to what that looks like, and if indeed it is April 2025. The other thing I was going to mention as well, I think what I've heard from both Russ and Ian is that before we go out to consult on the knowledge test, we'd like to sit down with the trade and understand, what that actually looks like. So actually, by the time we go out to consult, it will have that co-design feel to it. There still needs to be a slight dividing line, because clearly we're the licensing authority. But I think there's an opportunity to work with the trade on what that actually looks like through a sort of a co-design process. Thanks.
Okay, we can add that into the recommendation. Some pre-consultation. Okay, so it's. Were you seconding that earlier? Was that? Yes. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All in favour? All of those in favour? Yeah. Yeah. And I know. Okay. And again, are you against?
No, I'm not clear that that's been included properly. So.
Well, you heard the discussion. I think it's clear enough. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. So that recommendation will go forward to exec for their meeting in June, I think. So thank you for the speakers for coming, and obviously officers will be consulting with you, and we're engaging with you in good time. Sorry about that. I don't. Well, I won't accept that people impugn the reputation or the honesty of our officers. So you know, that's. I don't accept what he's just said, and it shouldn't be said. Unfortunately, he's gone from the room, so I can't say it to him. But I have no doubt you're professional officers who've given us, you know, full and frank information. I know. Thank you anyway. Okay. So now we have report of the Developer Contribution Scrutiny Panel, and Mrs. Wiley to lead us off.
So I think I'm just going to say a few words, Chair, if that's okay, through you, and then I'll hand over to Stacey, who's absolutely done all of the hard work alongside the member panel. So just very briefly, as we know, members, there has been since day one, I think, of us coming into being as a council in 2021, a lot of interest around Section 106 or developer contributions, quite rightly so. By our own elected members, but also by members of town and parish councils as well in particular. And I think it's also fair to say that Section 106 monies in all its guises has come under, as a result of that, some quite significant scrutiny, I think is fair to say, since 2021. We've had 2 internal audits internally from within the organisation, as well as the Planning Advisory Service when they came in the autumn of 2022 and produced their report, which also had some specific recommendations to Section 106. So this committee, the Place and Environment Committee, on the back of all of that activity, and in particular the PAS review, Planning Advisory Service, and the internal audit, requested a more detailed look at Section 106. And you'll see in the report, a scoping report was developed and brought to this committee in October of last year. And then there were a number of focus meetings that over 5 months between December last year and April this year, which has resulted in this report. I think, from what I've heard in the numerous conversations I've had with members, I think it addresses quite a lot of the comments that I've heard specifically from members, particularly around member engagement, particularly around town and parish engagement, particularly around the database, particularly around a single source of information. But as I say, I'll hand over to Stacey now, who'll take you through, I suppose, the key elements of the work that's been done by both members of that panel and Stacey. Thanks. Is your mic on? Yeah, use that one and I'll tell you.
Take 2. There we go. Yes, thank you, George. As alluded to, the area of Section 106 has come under quite intense scrutiny over the last 4 years. And a lot of work has been underway from the developer contributions team to try and address those recommendations that have arisen from the first audit, which was undertaken looking at historic processes and historic arrangements around governance and monitoring and reporting. And that resulted in the second audit report earlier in 2022 with an improved finding of satisfactory in respect of Section 106 monitoring. So there's already a substantial amount of work that's been underway to address a lot of those issues. The purpose of the scrutiny panel was to further build on that progress and to really get to grips with some of the further issues that had been identified by councillors, in particular by local parish town councils, around engagement and around communication and transparency of Section 106 funding and information in their areas. So a lot of the focus of this report and of the work that the scrutiny panel has undertaken has been to consider what actions we can put in place now that would address those further recommendations or those further issues. So briefly, if I just go through the recommendations that the panel have suggested, that we develop a mechanism whereby councillors, town and parish councils are able to access details directly regarding Section 106 contributions that have been secured for their areas, including information on new and historic agreements. And as part of that as well, that you're kept informed as and when any new Section 106 agreements are completed or signed in relation to developments within your respective areas. As well as that, all partners are better informed with regards to the process for submitting comments when you're looking for Section 106 contributions for specific projects or types of infrastructure. During the consultation stage on planning applications, and we will produce some easy to use and easy to interpret guidance to help inform and guide partners in that process. We also want to ensure that all of that information is easily accessible on the council's website, so producing some, again, making sure that all of the policy documents that are pertaining to Section 106 are easily accessible and in a single place, that are easy to locate, and we can signpost partners to those. One of the recommendations as well from the panel was to explore the use of bonds in relation to Section 106, which isn't something that is currently widely used by the council. And I think there was a concern around security of Section 106, where there might be issues to do with viability, particular of specific developments or developers. So I think that's a piece of work that we're keen to take forward based on your recommendations. Also, that an annual report be presented to councillors detailing Section 106 funds that have been requested, secured, collected, spent and returned, which also sets out as well the priorities for spending all of those contributions. And then the final two recommendations are that work continues to complete the restructure of the service to support management of Section 106 agreements, making sure that we've got sufficient resources and capacity within the team to continue to provide effective governance and assurance arrangements. And also that work continues as part of the ICT transformation project to bring all of the Section 106 records into a single online platform that will make everyone's access to that data much more effective and easy to use. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, conversations at the Big 50 were quite often about the ICT facility. Have we got any councillors wishing for Councillor Dorridge?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll come in. I really welcome seeing this. It's really good that we've got this board, and obviously these recommendations are really, really good. There were a couple of things. So with regards to sort of town and parish council engagement, I really think that is a very key aspect. I think it would be really useful as well, and that I don't really see anything in the recommendations for this with regards to suggestions for projects. I don't know if that's something that we could include in terms of either, obviously we want like a simple way of doing this, and I appreciate that members of the public may have some good ideas as well, but perhaps we could go through town and parish councils and triangulate some good ideas that way, but perhaps that just a simple form on the website or something like that would be another handy way for people to start engaging with this as a thing. One thing that I kind of wanted to note about challenges with Section 106 that I've noticed over my couple of years being a councillor, the pots being too tightly ring-fenced seems to be an issue, or has been historically an issue. So looking at how we can just bear that in mind and have sort of broad pots. I think as well, people really would like to see that this supporting, obviously it's there for supporting infrastructure, but I think people with new developments are desperate to see things more like schools, community centres, doctors, dentists, road cycleways. Those tend to be the overwhelming things that people are saying, why is this, or hopefully could this be spent on that? So I did also want to, the transparency of this on the website, really, really welcome. The other thing I was going to mention was, I think my worry has always been with Section 106 is if this is the only way that we are funding some of the key infrastructure projects that we have around the area, does that make us biased towards development or biased towards certain development? And I think that's always a slight concern for me. wanting to make sure that some of our priority and vital local infrastructure improvements are funded through other routes as well. And that Section 106 is to improve, amplify, put in some of those community centres, doctors, things that are needed with that development. But I mean, that is my concern, is we've got things like, if they're used, for instance, just for potholes or infrastructure, where actually that really should be focused with other things. So I think that's my sort of concern there. But yeah, thank you.
I don't think repairing potholes would come under the definition of making it clearly necessary for the development, but unfortunately, have we got any? Councillor Coleman, you want?
Having worked on this, I must say it's a very thorough report, and the recommendations are clear. You picked up everything, and it is the transparency, and within that are areas, when you said about making suggestions, you can actually see on the website and within these where you can make those recommendations. So it is much more explicit now and easier to understand. So I certainly recommend this document. Thank you very much. Very thorough.
Councillor Wilkes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, absolutely. Also sat on the committee, and I think we picked everything up. There's two things that I thought we discussed, but crikey, it's hard to remember. 2.6C, where we were talking, we spent a lot of time talking about about town and parish councils being better informed of the process of putting comments forward. But I'm fairly sure we also discussed informing town and parishes to have projects ready. So to be prepared to have projects that they've thought about, that potentially they've priced, that are ready. So if a 106 opportunity comes up, they have something that can slot into it. Fairly sure we talked about it. And so I'd like to see that having projects ready.
I think that's covered in C, where it says adopted policy, evidence and strategic priorities. And I think that means strategic priorities for the town and parish councils as well as for NNC. So, but I mean, we can expand it, obviously, if need be.
In where, Chair? Where are you saying
C,
you think it's covered?
C, the end of last sentence is C.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I see. It was C that I was really referring to. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, we just want to make sure that town and parishes understand that it's important to have those projects, you know, thought out, scoped, ready to go. And my last thing that I think we discussed, doesn't really fall within this, but it's sort of connected, is on G. I suppose it would come under G, where we're talking about ensuring that we've got sufficient resources and capacity are in place to enable improvements to be implemented. I'm fairly sure we also talked about making sure that there were sufficient resources for enforcement. So it was monitoring and enforcing 106.
Okay.
Other than that.
Add that. Okay. I take the point about broader definitions. I can think of an instance where a very specific piece of infrastructure was put into 106, and when it was then paid, it was found that technically it was not legally or technically possible to actually do it. So the money had to go back to the developer, because the developer, seeing an opportunity, decided not to let the money be spent elsewhere. So subsequently, some of them have been a bit broader in their definitions. So, but there was a couple of things that recommendations. First of all, I think we should add a recommendation of welcoming the developer contribution board and the index linking, because those were things that we talked about, and we should welcome. They're in already, so we don't need to recommend them, but I think we should note them. I wonder whether paragraph 3.13 and 3.14 are adequately covered. This is where things are unviable, or there's a deed of variation. Added to that, I know there were comments about if there was a considerable sized 106, it could come back to committee, because I mean, I'll give you a couple of instances where, and we know of instances where things have been picked up, and I know Councillor Mercer had a particular one, but I can think of a couple that are currently out there where works to a roundabout at least 5 miles from development have been included, but not to the roundabout that's 200 yards away. And I can think of another one where roundabout about 3 miles away has been included, but again, the one next to the development hasn't been included for upgrading. And whether there was a menu from highways that they wanted, but it doesn't reflect the actual need and the you know, what the local people would say they wanted done had they have seen it. And so I'd like to see a recommendation about things returning to committee and talking about the parish and town councils. Perhaps we could look at early engagement so that, you know, often on major developments we get pre-application advice being given. So that's an opportunity to talk to local parish. I mean, I had a thing through on a development. There's no application gone in, but the developer actually sent through to me some details of something they wanted to do, and there was an opportunity for comment. Developer chose to do it. All credit to them. They didn't have to, but you know, that early engagement gives us an opportunity to think about things. I think those are the things that are missing for me.
If I may come back on a couple of the points. On that last point regarding pre-application engagement, I think that will be a planning matter rather than a Section 106 matter. So I think that's something that would need to be taken up with the planning service regarding what the process is and what the requirements are around consultation for pre-app.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily, but it's just early engagement with local people or local organisations is the point.
Thank you for all of the comments. I think in terms of suggestions for projects, yes, absolutely, we will be encouraging parish councils, town councils to put forward proposals. I think part of the engagement that we will be doing is informing what those forecast contributions are going to be, what's been secured in their area, what the council's holding already, and what those contributions are intended to fund. Obviously, Section 106 is very tightly regulated in terms of the legislation, so we do have to make sure that any proposed use is in line with the community infrastructure levy regulations. So we don't want to leave ourselves open to challenge by supporting a scheme that might not be in accordance with either the SIL Reg 122 challenges or either with the individual Section 106 agreement from which those funds relate. So whilst we will encourage that engagement, there does have to be some caveats to that. And I think part of that process as well, when we're talking about strategic priorities, will be inviting consultation when, for example, we're going out with new policies around direction of strategic leisure provision or with any other sort of council policy that's looking at the provision of community infrastructure. So that is something that we will be inviting town and parishes to look at contributing to and putting forward their own priorities for investment in their areas. So hopefully that covers a lot of those queries.
If there's a message to send out, it's get a neighbourhood plan, because then you can put evidence in there. And if you haven't got one... One thing we haven't mentioned at all in this is unilateral undertakings. And I don't know how you enforce is the wrong word, but how you monitor those. And is there a different process? Is that different?
No, there's no different process. They are still covered under Section 106, so they are still registered as a local land charge in the same way that a Section 106 agreement would. The only difference is that the council is not a party to the unilateral undertaking, so there cannot be an obligation within the UU for the council to act in a certain way or deliver something in a certain way. So a unilateral undertaking is usually only put forward where there is a difference of opinion, shall we say, between what the developer wants to provide and what the policy is saying that they ought to.
So how do we agree, not agree? Does it end up going to pins all the time if there's
yes, it may well do if it's refused by committee. So the application would be decided in the normal way on the basis of what's in that unilateral undertaking. Obviously, the council's preference is always to have an agreement to which it is party, but in some cases it might be unavoidable. Okay.
We've got through to A through to H. Is everybody happy with all of those, with a little bit of addition for the towns and parishes? But and if I add an I, which is to welcome the DC board and the index linking, all happy we do that. And how are we going to cover this deeds of variation and unviability aspect? Is that, I mean, these are only recommendations. And actually, how will these recommendations be proceeded with? This is going to exec as a report. Yeah. So, can we add a recommendation that all we can ask is them to consider? They consider enabling the committee to look at 106 agreements again and instances of unviability and deeds of variation. Give them some work to do. Yeah.
Could I just make sure that we've got Councillor Wilkes's extra comment, and I think mine probably would slot in quite well in C with regards to like town and parish councils are better informed for the process of putting forward comments in relation to existing things within their wards, but also for also putting forward other contributions. Is that covered sufficiently there?
We'll add an extra bit about that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Make sure that, yeah, that's fine. Okay, all happy with that? All in favour of that? Okay. So thank you for all your hard work in this. I know it's been a long slog and a lot of work. And looking at the list you sent me of the 106s, it's been a hell of a job putting that list together from the various sources and getting all the information. And it's a superb piece of work. So thank you. And I assume Mrs. Geary's been involved as well. So yeah. Thank you for that. And hopefully we'll get to a position where everybody's better informed and happy with it. Thank you. Yes, just slip off here quietly. Okay, so the last item, carbon management plan.
That's
Mr.
myself, Chair.
Waterworth.
Yeah, thank you. So just to briefly introduce the report, Chair. So members will be aware that in December 2022, the Council endorsed a carbon management plan, which was a plan to set out our route map for how we would be carbon neutral by 2030. And as part of that plan, we committed to an annual review, which was to monitor the plan, review our carbon footprint and update the activity that we've been undertaking to achieve that target. So I'm pleased to present the report in front of you, which is that review. And just to touch on a few key points of the report. So we committed to build upon the quality and completeness of our emissions data. So I'm pleased to say that's been done. And you'll see in the report there's a calculation of just over 20,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent emissions. I'm sure you would notice that that is a change on the previously reported figure. And the main differences for that is the inclusion of more of our Scope 3 emissions. So those are our indirect emissions that are attributed to our activity. So things like the collection of household waste from residents and things like staff business travel. The other difference is the inclusion of the Scope 1 fleet mileage and also some improved data quality around our building utility emissions. So that's all been updated and reflected in the report. We've also undertaken a review of our activities in the report, and there's a breakdown on page 13 that shows where we're up to in terms of those activities. Happy to pick up queries around those specific activities, but what I would say is a lot of the work we've done to date has been about building the foundations for us to develop projects, work towards funding bids, particularly as there's a significant amount of funding opportunities, external funding opportunities towards decarbonisation projects at the moment. So it's really been about sort of the building blocks to put us in a good place to achieve those future reductions in our carbon emissions. But as the report indicates, we have made a number of positive investments to the here and now in terms of reductions in our carbon, such as things like electric refuse vehicle and vans, investment in battery-operated equipment and moving away from fuel-operated equipment, along with other achievements that we've detailed in the report. So happy to take questions and welcome feedback on the report ahead of it being presented to Executive.
Councillor Pennant want to come in on anything? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And the first thing I want to say is actually thank you to the officers that have been working on this. Nicole, Jonathan and the team have worked incredibly hard to bring this forward for you today. There's lots of data in it, and actually coming from a starting point of the old sovereign councils, there's had to be a lot of work done to bring all the data together to get us where we are, but then also bring the projects forward to reduce the emissions as well, and keep on track with that. I think we're moving in the right direction. There's lots of work going on behind the scenes on the various projects, and as you'll see, various activities are already at a good stage. Some have been completed and others are at advanced stages. So I think we're in a good place with this, and I'm just keen for the feedback of the Scrutiny Committee before we take this report to executive. And I think what we'll try and do with questions is I'll try and field them as much as possible with the support of Nicole and Jonathan, who've been working very hard on this.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly a lot of data and a lot of work. Anyone got?
You know I've got lots to say. First of all, it's a fantastic report. So thank you. There's truly, as you said, a lot of work, a lot of data. I know that there's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes to get us sort of where we are now. And like you say, I do recognise that a lot of foundations are being sort of laid, and that we've also had challenges with resources as well. I mean, even just the fact that we've recently hired and now lost our energy officer and all of that stuff. So I think it's, I know we've got challenges, but I think progress is being made, and I have been really excited to read about some of this. I really feel like the RAG sort of structure here has been really helpful just to gauge a really good view of where we're at. We are in scrutiny though, so I'm going to dig into the detail. So yes, I think I wanted to note, right, I'll just work through. So the page 236, regards to assets, exploratory conversations with suppliers to understand feasibility of large-scale renewables. I have mentioned multiple times about the big solar co-op, but I know that there is some work going on there, but it'd be really interesting to know if that has been explored or not. I haven't really had any confirmation either way. When we're talking about, looking at the sort of overarching timeline, I'm just a general comment in the fact that we're obviously working towards a deadline of net zero by 2030. However, what I would like to know is what elements, or maybe it's something really for the team just to think about, is what elements can be brought to zero by 2025 or 2028. I know that some are sort of short, medium, long term, but my concern as well is if we're aiming to, our sort of graph of our trajectory is aiming for 2030 with not really any time for disruption, challenges, wiggle room, we are going to hit challenges. So I do think if we can start to aim a little bit closer, I mean, we are talking about an emergency, we're looking to try and do all of this work as quickly as possible in a reasonable way, of course. So I think that's just something I wanted to put in there, just so we can kind of, especially with things like the energy officer, can we bring that forward a little bit so that we can have the space for those contingencies. On page 16 of the actual report, mentioned here about fugitive emissions. This is a lot higher than I had realised, and I would really like to know a little bit more about how we can dig into that. It's like double the emissions from our transport fleet, so that was quite stark and something that I haven't really seen before. So very keen to dig into that in more detail if that's possible. And so the laser contract with smart meters, I really would like to contest that 5 years is far too long for this. We've got a deadline for that for 5 years, which I appreciate is possibly within our existing contract with them, but because we've got that, it means that the officers, we as an authority aren't going to know necessarily as in the finer details what energy each of these buildings are using until that is in place. So really, I would like to challenge that we can go back and renegotiate this. If we can get that done within a year, then we can actually start a year or two, start to actually look at some of these areas, especially at least prioritising some of the ones that really need that data. Like you say, we kind of need to get our foundations right. If we're waiting 5 years to get that data, that's not going to be really, I don't know, very good enough. So EPC ratings. I think I have talked to a fair few officers about this already. The deadline really is too long. In terms of making sure that that's just our base level of understanding where we're at, we need to then look at retrofitting and bid for funding. All of these things are going to take time. I really, really implore that we look at training people outside of the council to do this, possibly looking for funding that could support to do that. I know that some of the eco groups in Wellingborough are doing some amazing work bidding for funding, so I would thoroughly recommend we look at that to catalyse things a little bit. Number 7, so I've mentioned here about potentially setting a competition for offices to reduce consumption as much as possible. I know that there are a few different elements about getting officers engaged in this, and obviously like how we travel into the office, that's a part of it, but actually potentially looking at energy and how much we're using in the office. We did something like this at my work, and yeah, the parts of the office that reduced the most managed to win a prize. Some things that have been really effective as well, things like timers for water coolers, timer plugs for across offices, motion sensor lights, that sort of thing. Number 10, I'm very disappointed to read that the executive decided not to change to 100% renewable energy. That is a failed initiative. That needs to be marked so in the report as well. That's currently marked as a delivered project. That has not been delivered. That is a failed project. With energy being our biggest emission factor, choosing not to switch to renewable is a big, it doesn't show that our commitment is where we say it is. So I'm quite disappointed with that. Number 11, what energy reduction projects... Oh, hang on, let me just pop back over. I've not put enough notes. So number 11, okay, yes, so this is just about energy projects that we're looking at. I think it's not yet started, but it'd be useful to know a little bit more detail about that one, please. Number 19, Kia switching to EVs. This really looks like it's lagging. They're just trialling them, and it's not really good enough considering this is a short-term project, especially I think we've got them for March next year. I really think we need to be holding them to account on this. They've already got a short deadline with that, so I mean I think switching for 50% as their trial, I don't know how big their trial is at the moment, so I think that's part of the conversation, but ultimately if they've got a short deadline we need to be holding them to that, and just a little bit of a trial isn't going to cut it. We need to make sure that we're moving on that. Power tools, so number 21, the power tools progressing to electric seems to be stalling, which it's a really, really good initiative, and I think we've mentioned it a lot, but I've just obviously seen a bit of an impact in terms of like the progress of it. It would be lovely to know more about which of the heavier power tools don't have an effective alternative and why, and maybe if we can dig into that, that'd be probably helpful. I know that obviously 35% have changed, which is really good. Number 30, hired vans are carbon neutral, and that is something that we're looking to start in 25-26. That doesn't make any sense to me. I think I'd just like to know why it's been delayed for such a long time, especially if it's something that if we just made that as a policy, we could just hire electric vehicles going forward, or at least hybrids. That would make some sense. So just some clarity on that would be great. 78, implement large-scale renewable energy schemes. It would be really good to know who's leading on that. As I said, I'm really interested with a few other options for solar. But it's really good that we're getting solar on the Corby pool, and that's pushing forward, so that's great. A couple of things that we're missing. Oh, no, sorry, I've got a couple of other bits. 81, it's a real shame the Corby District Energy Scheme is on hold. That was something I noted was missing in terms of like district heating networks, especially with gas being such a high percentage of our emissions. So I didn't know if Electric Places could pick up that, because I know that they've been previously involved in that project and similar. But yeah, that scheme would be very, very useful. Number 32, I wanted to just clarify what was the delay in ordering some EVs for that project as well. And finally, in terms of like comments on the existing ones in there, so 41, 43 and 46, all about sort of getting staff engaged in terms of sustainability and travelling to work. One of this was pretty much all of the things in this area, it just says they will be picked up by the sustainability team in the future. So I just kind of wanted to clarify when the sustainability team will be in place, firstly, and second, why, or get some more clarity on why it needs to wait until then, because things like, for instance, a travel survey doesn't need to be particularly onerous. That could be something that is supported by some of our partners, like Brightways do a lot of things like that, and they're very easy to do and quite cheap or even free. So the only things, that's all my comments on the existing things. Things that were missing that I thought that might be worthwhile feeding in, because I know we've got a few new projects which all look really good. The local greening, so in our biodiversity section, local greening, for instance, bus stops, walls, rooftops, all of that stuff can be incredibly valuable, not only for reducing pollution in urban spaces, but also for reducing temperatures as well. So as we are going into one of the what's going to be the hottest year ever on the planet. We need to be thinking about kind of some of those other things, even though if it might not necessarily be a short-term project, it might be something that we want to add to the mix for doing some urban greening in the future to deal with some of these issues that we're going to have. Also, more community allotments, and I kind of wanted to mention sort of back in the war, every bit of space was used to grow food and to grow different things, and there's a real feeling in the community at the moment that people want to take up bits of land. They want to take up bits of NNC land, and that would not only save us money, but I mean, there's obviously challenges that come with that. Don't worry, I've spoken at length with the grounds team about the various challenges, but I think if there's a cultural shift that's there, we definitely need to be just sort of taking that into account, either for communities to grow flowers or food. I think that's something that there's definitely the feeling there. Thank you. I'll let everyone else have a chat now.
I hope you got all that down. Okay, thank you. Do you want to comment on any of those?
Thank you. I'm quite sure I missed some of those, I'm afraid, because it was a long list, which is obviously always welcome to get all the feedback. So we'll do our best to answer them. I think it may be the case that we need to perhaps go away, depending on some of the questions, and come back with answers to those around specific projects, because Nicole has a fantastic knowledge of all of these, but they are being managed across the council, so some of the detail may need to be may need to come back on. So if I just pick up on a few of those points first, and then hand over to officers where I've missed bits. So my understanding is, with regard to the big solar, there are conversations and explorations around that going on, looking at this, what would be the art of the possible, etc. So that's going on in the background as we speak. In respect of what we can be doing sooner, in terms of the 2030 date, I don't think it's that we just want to get to 2030 and suddenly do everything. I think if we can do things sooner, we will definitely be doing them sooner. It's just dependent on the timescales and the resources that we have, the capabilities to do all of them. That would definitely be the aspiration that, if we could do it all tomorrow, then we would, because that would be fantastic, but we've just got to work with the timeframes that we've got, and absolutely we will where we can. Question around fugitive emissions, obviously an interesting one, and I think this is a piece of work where, so for example, we set out in the report that the Scope 3 emissions are one that we need to go into further detail with, and understand these better. Fugitive emissions fall into that. We need to understand those better as well. And having the data in a better place, as we do now, gives us the ability to then dig into it further and really understand what it means, and therefore what we need to do and when we need to do it, and the resources that we need to do it as well. Just quickly going down some of the other bits here. So there's a number of suggestions around specific projects and how we can move those forward, and other bits that perhaps fall into some of the projects where we've already got. So happy to take those away and look at them where we can. Conversations around things like EV switching with Kier, that's not something I've had conversations specifically around with Kier themselves, so I have to understand that a bit better. as well. I think what is best to do now is probably hand over and see what officers would like to add to that in terms of answering some of the specifics there, if that's okay.
Okay, so in regards to fugitive emissions, this is emissions from our closed landfill sites. So these are emissions that are monitored on a frequent basis to track the amount of gases that are expelling from the sites. It also includes refrigeration losses, so from air conditioning units and other refrigeration units that we have on our sites, but it's predominantly from the closed landfill. That's why the figure is so large. In the original carbon management plan, the fugitive emissions were not looped in with closed landfill. Closed landfill wasn't under fugitive emissions, which is where it should sit. So we've rectified that this time. In regards to the KIR vehicles, I've had conversations with the head of highways, and he assures me that KIR is working to research vehicle availability. They're frequently trialing them out to test out range, and whatever the vehicle type is to make sure that it is suitable for its purpose. And as of right now, the technology is not thought to be there to replace their entire fleet with EVs, but they are continually testing and switching out when they can do. They do have the duration of our contract with them to make that happen, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, George, I can't remember off the top of my head, is it until 2027?
It's initially 7 years, but then the opportunity for a further 7 years. So,
yeah.
And we're in year 2.
Yeah. Let me see what else.
I think it was in their contract that the 3.5 tonners had to be within a year, and the rest had a bit of leeway.
Through you, Chair. So they have delivered against the targets that are set within the contract thus far in terms of EV transfer, but I absolutely understand and get that, which I think is the main thrust of the questions that I've heard, is can we go faster? Can we go faster? And I get that. I absolutely get that. But yeah, so far, to be fair to KIR, they've met all of the contractual timelines that were written into the contract thus far.
The other thing I was going to add in regards to your question on renewables, we are currently looking at developing a business case for the Climate Change Investment Fund funding to hopefully procure a consultant to do the initial feasibility work on that. So that is something that we are very much trying to push forward this financial year.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Wadsworth.
Chair, if I may, just a couple more questions to come back, and I'm happy to, if you want to send over the list of questions, because I didn't manage to jot them all down, I couldn't keep up, but a really good list, and thank you for some of the querying around some of the deadline dates, because that's something we can take away and review and see is it something we can push and see if we can do quicker. Just a couple that I did want to pick up on. One was the green energy decision. So when we brought forward the energy procurement report to executive, we also took it to the executive advisory panel to really sort of focus in on this issue around green energy, and is it worthwhile doing or not, and what are the pros and cons, because clearly you're buying green energy, ideally it comes from a green source. The problem, and what we're finding a lot in the market now, is that for utilities, that is, because green energy has to be certified, so it has something called a REGO. Don't ask me to recall what it stands for, but a REGO, yeah. And because there's a market for those being traded, effectively you can go out and sell REGOs and buy them, but you can't necessarily trace back that the energy that you're buying actually came from a green source. And this seems to be an issue in terms of the market, that actually you can go out to a supplier who's selling you green energy, but they haven't actually supplying you green energy. They've just bought the certificates from someone else who has. So there was a balance on that in terms of, one, it costs more as well, so you're investing in that extra money to buy it. But instead of that, are we better off actually investing money in decarbonising our buildings or other users of electricity, gas, whatever it is. So, and the outcome, a part of those consultations, was that the preference would be that we focus on the latter and look at decarbonising the source rather than purchasing green energy. So it was considered as part of that process, and I'm happy to share the report and go through that if that would be helpful. But yeah, no, it was just that one, Chair. Thank you.
Did you want to? Okay, I've got a few, shorter list. Page 260, I'm looking at, I'm assuming these are numbers in the yellow box are relevant, 76, 77 and 79. Does that apply to our remaining maintained schools? It mentions schools at the bottom there, but we are responsible for the fabric of those, and there seems to be an opportunity there to maintain schools with solar panels. Is that something that's being looked at as part of the asset, whatever it's called, asset scrutiny?
Excuse me. So schools, in terms of how they operate, in terms of their treatment, they're effectively treated as their own entity rather than part of our carbon footprint emissions. However, this project is looking to pick that up in terms of capturing the fact that there is investment in maintained schools and how we can deliver that.
Yeah. Quite often the roofs are the problem, so two birds with one stone. On the theme fleet 25, I have to say I was a bit disappointed that we only went for one electric HGV. One of the things when you get on mailing lists is you can't get off them, and I get, from a previous role, I get all the mailing lists of what other councils and other operators are doing, and there's quite a number of electric HG refuse vehicles being ordered. So I'd be interested to know how that trial is going and where we are with the next lot of ordering we have to do, because I realise there's contracts out there. So I'd be interested to know. You may not know immediately, but if that can be, anybody's done the evaluation.
Yeah, so quickly on that, the last update I had was that the trial is going well, actually, which is good news. That's what we all hope to hear. But as when you're bringing in kind of a new bit of technology to do an incredibly important job for the council, there is always a bit of probably nervousness about how it's actually going to go. So it is good news that it is going well. I will revert to an officer perhaps for any updates on if we're looking at this further, purchasing more at the moment. Always.
Yeah, so for you, Chair. So as Councillor Penton said, that the trial is going well, and that's what it was intended as a trial. It's worth bearing in mind, I think as I said at the last scrutiny meeting, electric RCVs are nearly twice the price, so it is important that when we make that decision to purchase, that we're going to have a vehicle that provides an effective service for residents that are receiving the benefit of the collection of that waste. In terms of the next tranche of procurement, we've working with colleagues in the waste team in terms of the next procurement around what was the former East Northants contract. So that's the first one that's due up for consideration, and obviously the team are considering the operating model, and if there is an opportunity within that model to look at further opportunities for electric or alternative fuel vehicles as part of that procurement.
Okay. So no, I think that electric one was operating under Wellingborough, and I keep waiting for it to come and pick up mine, but it's always the diesel one that comes to me all the extra. Numbers in highways and waste, number 17. It says in the street lighting that it's estimated to 2 years, complete in June 26. Well, if we'd got to nearly 5,000 December 23, it should be a lot earlier than June 26, surely, if it's 2 years.
That's the time frame for the project that Balfour Beatty has given to us. So they're working across west and north to change all the street lighting out at the same time. So the delivery for that project is anticipated to be in June 26, but it may well be sooner. We just I mean, can't guarantee that.
Yeah, I know there was a delay to starting it, but yeah. And then on the same page, 21, again, same thing. I keep getting mail-shotted about lots of electric, and some of it looks pretty heavy duty to me. So I hope we can improve them and the number of hand tools that we're buying that are electric or otherwise driven than fuel. And page 270, 40, it talks about e-bikes and e-scooters. I understand that, we know that the e-bikes have been withdrawn, and I understand they're not coming back, which is a shame because there must be a lot of people who would not want to use an e-scooter but would feel able to use an e-bike. And I don't know if there's Mr. A. Church is more likely to know the answer to this than anybody. If there's an alternative being looked at with e-bikes, if we're not going to bring them back. No. Pass it along.
Thank you. You're correct. So, the Voi e-bikes, it doesn't appear that they are going to come back any time soon. We had the e-bike scheme, NEBIS scheme, which ran with businesses. So we're looking again about what we do in terms of the future of that. So that was a trial where you could have use of an e-bike for a period of 4 to 6 weeks. So that's an opportunity to bring that back into use. So we are looking at options to increase availability of e-bikes, although it wouldn't be of the scale that we had with Voi.
And I think you might get the next one as well. 42, the EV charging points, and we've had a very successful scheme with Believe as they are now, and a number of those around, and you see them being used, fortunately. But we've still got the opportunity in a number of our own car parks and our own theatres that we own, and other sports facilities and so on to provide these. And you go around the countries and you see them in other places. We seem to be a little bit behind. Any idea when we might start to get a plan there for provision in our own car parks and other sites?
So in terms of through the Levi project, which is a successor to VPatch that you're referring to, so we're successful in terms of being in tranche one for that. We've received our first 90% of the funding. We now need to procure a new supplier, which we're intending to do in the spring. So that ICT's invitation tender documentation has been put together at the moment. The focus for that will be on street, similar to the work we Believe, where people don't have off-street parking, but it will also include a number of our car parks, which are close to areas of typically terraced housing without off-street parking. So some of our car parks will be adding to the EV charging points that are currently there.
Yeah, it's the destination ones that we could do with. And I have to say, I read the policy you did on, and it was an excellent piece of work. I was very impressed with the piece of work, and it got good response, I think, from when you sent it in. So it was well received. It was excellent. Anybody else? Any comments? Councillor Irwin.
So just a quick one about the methodology. So when you do your calculations, you came up with 20,000 tonnes of CO2. I was wondering, how far do you take into account, for example, you list elsewhere in the report that you planted 10,000 trees. Do you take that into account when you do your calculations of carbon usage?
So that's not within that figure there. That is a piece of work that needs to be looked at in the future, as we understand the different aspects of it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be considered offsetting of that, and that's not a piece of work that we've yet undertaken, but it is one that we want to undertake. And in relation to that, you've also got things like biodiversity net gain and our local nature recovery strategy. Which we have dedicated officer working on those, and those will be important in understanding what we could do in terms of offsetting. Offsetting is a bit of a tricky word because bit of a tricky thing, I think, because ultimately you want to make sure that you're reducing your emissions firstly and foremostly before you're looking at offsetting. But it is still an important part of it, I think. So there will be work going on around that to better understand what that means for us as a council in terms of the natural assets that we've got in that regard. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, go on.
I just wanted to come on to the point of offsetting very quickly, because I appreciate that is kind of more down the line. Something that has come up as a suggestion that I didn't know if it would be worthwhile feeding in now. Someone has suggested about that local businesses could or should have some opportunity to offset locally. And I mean, I think they came up with, I mean, there's lots of different ways you could do it, but something along the lines of if you have X amount of carbon and you work out your own carbon emissions, then you pay X amount. And I don't know, just have some sort of equating thing. So bigger businesses could contribute more to a pot, a local pot that could then go back to supporting local businesses to transition, because that is one of the big challenges, isn't it? I didn't know if that might be something that could be explored. It obviously needs a bit more teasing out, but I think in terms of local offsetting, businesses are interested in it, but we could really think about how we could leverage that. But yes, I did just want to query just about the team, the sustainability team, just really to get some clarity on that. I also don't mind if that comes back via email, but if there is any clarity on if that is currently set up or if that is to be set up, that would be really useful.
Yeah, happy for us to feedback on that, and perhaps I'm getting pointed toward George, yeah.
So in terms of the sustainability team, I'll provide a separate update if that's okay, as it's relating to staffing, if that's okay. But needless to say, the team will sit under Ian A. Church as a sustainability team. As you know, we've got a number of officers at the moment, and we just need to pull that together. So I think you would expect me to say this, but I think the team should be commended. You know, because we've not only have we got a team. It sits within place and economy, but actually what we've been able to do is galvanise staff across the organisation as well, because the sustainability agenda should be part of the DNA of the organisation, and therefore needs to be owned by everyone in the organisation, not just a small team, but clearly somebody needs to coordinate and drive that forward, which to date I think the team have done a great job. But I would say that, wouldn't I?
Just quickly, if I may, Chair, with regard to the offsetting, again, it's, as I said, it's a complicated area, so something that would need to be looked at very carefully. But I think the legislation around biodiversity net gain has brought this conversation more to the fore in terms of what is possible and what is the role or options for local authorities to be doing in that regard, whether you know, around land that they may have that may be suitable for that kind of activity. So, as I said, we've got our officer who's working on biodiversity net gain and looking at elements of that, and so I think that's something that could be looked at in conjunction with that piece of work as well. But I think the conversation is now coming forward around that, whereas previously it perhaps hasn't.
One other thing that goes to me on page 248 is quite interesting how expensive this building is to run compared to Haylock House and Thrapston. I can understand the swimming pool because it's big space and has to be kept warm, but it does seem this is a very expensive building to run. I don't know, given that it's probably the newest of the ones as well, I don't expect you to comment because I'm sure you're working on it, but it's revealing anyway. If you want to.
No. I mean, it's a fair point. It is, and that's why we're looking at ways that we can decarbonise that, and we have put forward proposals around how we can do that, and hopefully looking to gain external funding to help with some of that. What I will say is this building operates every day. Probably apart from Christmas Day, you've got the theatre in operation, so a lot of those figures you can see, it probably skews some of that in terms of the building is operational quite a lot of the time in terms of hours in the day and all day, every weekend. So it's probably worth just bearing that in mind when looking at the data as well.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to have some of the buildings like the Castle and the Wendell, which are not operated directly by us but owned by us, what their figures are. Yeah. Okay, so we've got a couple of recommendations to note the positive work being undertaken, which is, I think we can all agree on, and then comments and feedback. I don't propose to list all of the comments and feedback, but hopefully the clerk has got the gist of it, and if we're happy that we've got the comments and the feedback and the responses that we need. Because this is a report, and this goes to exec, yes. So we'll put those in our summary for exec. All happy with that? Okay, all nodding. And I think that's the last item on the agenda, apart from close the meeting, which is easy. Thank you, everybody, for your time and work.